You know, sometimes, guys, this country can be so ridiculous. And who knows where the country goes half the time and where the country can go. I mean, why can't they just come up with a deal on Brexit and deliver to the people? But they'd rather betray it and do a second referendum. We've already been through this all since 2016. A lot of people have. We've made our minds up. It's like gambling and doing the lottery. It's like voting twice. I mean, in the hell, in any other country votes twice, except our country. It's like we're voting for another general election in this country. Boris Johnson needs to keep his grip with things. He's going to have a lot of people Boris Johnson's going to have a lot of haters. That's the name of the game. But like I say, if he keeps his head up, Boris Johnson, then we may leave the EU with no deal. It's like every prime minister we've had, they don't know how to run the country. They give us broken promises to all us people. It's like they don't know what's going on, and then they keep us in the dark. I like to know what is going on in our country, guys. I don't like to be kept in the dark and, kept in the shadows. I like to know what's going on. But they always tell us half a story in this world about the news or what's going to happen. They don't tell us the full story. I don't know if they do that to just not upset us or they do that just to get us prepared and not worry about things, but I don't know. It's very ridiculous, and I just wish this country was a bit more honest with the people. I mean, everybody has problems in this world and we all struggle. Well, some of us struggle worse than others, and there's not enough food and water in these worlds, and governments don't care about the people. It's a sad world. Everybody needs a friend to talk to and speak to, and just the world's gone to a big mess, in my opinion, especially with this Brexit thing. Broken promises. I'm sick of it. I wish they were honest and told the truth, these politicians. All they're in it for is just the money and stuff. But nice to have our country back, England. We can control our own borders, fish in our own seas. The French can come over to England and take as many fish as they want in our waters, but we can't. We have to put some back in our sea. That's wrong. This is Britain. We're British people. We should deserve better than that, guys. And that's all I need to say about this subject. I'm going to put you into the video and we can watch it. Okay, guys? Enjoy the video.
Welcome to the programme. It is make or break week for the UK as Parliament sits for the first time after the summer break. As the deadline for Brexit looms close, stakes are running high on both sides of the divide. Prime Minister Boris Johnson has upped the ante by demanding rebels on his own side toe the party line, and he's threatening to hold a snap general election if they don't. Evelyn Maverick reports.
Order! It's likely to be anything but order in the Commons in a potentially decisive week in Britain's tortuous Brexit saga. The opening salvo is today, an attempt by opposition and rebel MPs to seize control of the Commons agenda. If successful, MPs could then vote on demanding Boris Johnson seek an extension to Article 50 beyond the October 31st deadline. If they lose that vote, then the Prime Minister would be free to continue with his Brexit policy and the UK would remain on course for an EU exit with or without a deal at the end of next month. But if the MPs win, and this move is being supported by cross-party MPs and Conservative Party rebels despite threats of being sacked from Johnson, then things could get interesting. Initially, the aim was to debate the new law on Wednesday, September the 4th, moving it to the House of Lords on the Thursday and hoping for royal assent by the Queen by Monday, September the 9th. But once again, Johnson's government looks like taking the opposition by surprise and is said to be intending to present a motion for a general election the moment MPs take over the parliamentary agenda. It means an election could be voted upon as early as Wednesday, September the 4th, with October 14th being mooted as the date. So what's the view from Brussels? Well, EU leaders are keeping their thoughts on the UK political drama to themselves, having already been astounded by Johnson's decision to shut Parliament next week for 5 weeks. And for ordinary Britons, divided and despairing, the agony continues, now with the prospect of a snap election looking more likely than ever. Evelyn Maverick, Euronews.
Our correspondent Tig Enright joins us live now from Westminster. Morning, Tig. Parliament's back in session, but is the Prime Minister in control of the UK political agenda?
Well, good morning to you, Rosie, from London, where the anticipation really is building. And yes, there are two ways, really, of looking at this. You know, with a majority of just one and many rebels within the ranks of Boris Johnson's Conservative Party, this does not feel like a battle that he's likely to win, and he could be forced to change course on his Halloween Brexit. But the other way of looking at it is that actually this is exactly what he wants. He's a relatively new Prime Minister who's come in partway through a parliamentary term with a big crisis on his hands, and with that majority of just one, it's really impossible for him to get anything done. So this is an excuse, it could be said, for an election, one that he's always said he didn't want, and now he can give the impression that he's being strong-armed into it, and also the impression that he's being a martyr to the Brexit cause.
We come to that Brexit deadline. I am encouraged by the progress we are making. In the last few weeks, the chances of a deal have been rising. I want everybody to know there are no circumstances in which I will ask Brussels to delay. We're leaving on the 31st of October, no ifs or buts. And without an election, I don't want an election, you don't want an election.
But of course, it's not as simple as simply calling an election here. Outside of the normal 5-yearly parliamentary term, to have an election, it requires a vote here in Parliament and a 2/3 majority. Now, many MPs, even some Conservatives, would know that they would be voting themselves out of a job. And there are many on the opposition benches too who might be keen to have an election but will want to be in charge of the timing. So Boris Johnson might not even get his way on that either. Not terribly well prepared, I would say, Rosie. You know, the opposition is particularly disjointed right now, and while they have managed to put their differences aside and work together on stopping no deal, working together on an election campaign, or perhaps even choosing a joint leader, a leader of perhaps a unity government, would be another thing altogether. You know, Labour, the traditional party of opposition here, is languishing in the polls with a leader who is not terribly popular even with some members of his own party, even if this issue has given Jeremy Corbyn a new reason to be relevant.
Boris Johnson was doing was essentially threatening people with a no-deal Brexit if he doesn't get his way in Parliament. Our purpose is to challenge this government on a no-deal Brexit. Our purpose is to try to protect jobs and living standards.
God, he says the same fucking thing over and over again. Jeremy Corbyn. Protect jobs, customs union.
Of Donald Trump and a trade deal with the United States.
So the question is how or if opposition parties might be able to work together to resist a Conservative Party, which has been climbing up the polls again. Do they start doing deals at a very local level so that kind of pro-Remain candidates, everybody falls in behind just one of them? But there is also every chance that whatever new Parliament is chosen for here could be just as muddled as the one we have now. Rosie?
Tig Enright live outside Westminster for us. Thank you. Well, Brexit will be the defining issue of any future general election in the UK. But it's also highly unusual because it cuts across the tribal lines of the two major parties in the UK's political system. Paul Ging explains how the political forces line up on Brexit.
The Conservative Party's been in power since 2010, having won the last 3 elections. But the Tories are deeply divided over the issue of Brexit and have been for decades. Currently, their leader, self-styled man of the people Boris Johnson, is on the Eurosceptic side of the party. Polling suggests the Conservatives would win a snap general election. But that was also the case in 2017 when Theresa May began her snap general election campaign around 20 points ahead of Labour. But ultimately she just scraped together a government with the help of the DUP after a badly run campaign that substantially underestimated Labour under Jeremy Corbyn. Labour's also divided over Brexit with no clear single policy on the issue. Jeremy Corbyn's a Eurosceptic, even though he claims to have voted Remain in the referendum. Moderates in the party want to campaign on a second referendum with Remain as a possible solution, while others only want no deal off the table. The Liberal Democrats are the only openly pro-European party and want to reverse Brexit with a new referendum. But the British voting system of first past the post means that many of their votes are wasted and don't return them MPs. They're currently polling in the high teens. The smaller parties, the Scottish National Party, Plaid Cymru and the Greens, will be hoping to pick up enough votes to become kingmakers in any future coalition. They all support cancelling Brexit. And that leaves Nigel Farage and the Brexit Party. Under his leadership, they were winners in the recent European elections, attracting discontented Brexiteers with their anti-EU stance. Many see them as the Tories' nemesis. Paul Ging, Euronews.
Well, we're joined now from Brussels by our political editor, Darren McCaffrey. Morning, Darren. How are the latest goings-on in Westminster being viewed by leaders and negotiators across the European Union?
Well, you know what? It's really interesting that actually when you talk to people here in Brussels, they are now working, Rosie, on a default position. The Britain is likely to leave the European Union without a deal, and we are expecting those no-deal contingency plans to be yet again announced tomorrow here in Brussels. How to try and mitigate the worst effects of that on the European Union. Talk about using, for example, the European Solidarity Fund and the European Globalisation Adjustment Fund, i.e. essentially chucking loads of money at specific areas where help will be needed, even talking about declaring this essentially as an emergency, so funds could be diverted to places like Ireland that are expected to be quite quickly and immediately badly hit by it all. And then there is talk about how to deal with next year's budget. An extra 11 billion euros will have to be found, and that will have to come from existing EU members. But it is interesting listening to what Boris Johnson had to say yesterday in Downing Street, because that is simply not the picture that EU officials see. That is that progress is being made towards a deal, and that there are new kind of ideas on the table about how to deal with this thing of the Irish backstop. And it must be said that some of today's British press are reporting that that is not the case. In fact, apparently Dominic Cummings, who is Boris's chief of staff, has talked about how the EU negotiation is a sham, and they are simply counting down the clock in the hope that at the next EU summit on October 17th, irrespective of what happens in Westminster this week, that the EU will blink at the last minute. Interestingly, though, apparently the UK Attorney General has already told the UK Cabinet that it is a complete fantasy to think that the EU will move on the backstop. So it must be said, Brussels are merely looking on at this, slightly aghast, slightly confused about these messages of progress in the negotiations, but ultimately just sitting at the sidelines, waiting and watching to see what happens in the UK Parliament this week.
And only 58 days to go until Brexit. Thank you, Darren McCaffrey, our political editor, live in Brussels for us. We're joined now from London by Dennis McShane, former Europe Minister in Tony Blair's Labour government. Thanks for your time this morning. How much of a gamble do you think it would be for the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, to call a general election?
Absolutely enormous. First, let's see what happens today. It's an extraordinary day. There's every chance that Conservatives, who are middle-of-the-road Conservatives, have been astonished at the people, the real heavyweight people in the party who've said, no, we are not going to go down the road of even dreaming of a no deal. So if that law is passed today, Mr Johnson then has to decide whether to try and call a general election, and that may be blocked also in Parliament. Big debate happening in Labour. I was there last night listening to some of my old colleagues, because to defeat Mr Johnson on calling a general election would be a humiliating defeat for him. Not sure he can stay in office. And if a general election is held, Well, Norman Lamont, former Chancellor, very, very pro-Brexit, he said, oh gosh, this could all go horribly wrong because the first day or two might indeed be on Brexit, but the remaining 20 or 30 days would have to be on the issues that matter to people. And there, Mr Johnson's record, the Conservative record, is very weak. It's not a question of Mr Corbyn being more popular, but all the opposition parties will simply say, we want a fairer, more decent kind of Britain, and will offer the same spending programmes that Mr Johnson is offering. But in addition, we will give the people of Britain the chance to decide our fate on Europe. Mr Johnson won't. Mr Johnson is now one of the London elite that is denying the people of Britain the chance to vote on Europe. That's a very, very bad position. And sorry, Rose, I don't want to talk to you.
Do you think there should be a general election?
I personally think it will solve nothing because, as your very good political correspondent just said, supposing there is a general election, supposing by some miracle Mr Johnson gets a thumping majority, no one who's a professional in politics can see where this majority is going to come from. And then what? The EU's position is very simple. And the EU 27, the nationally elected government leaders say, we're going to defend our single market. We're going to defend what's been created over 70 years. We're not going to allow you to bust it up. We're not going to allow you to have special privilege. And above all, we're not going to give a green light to threatening peace in Northern Ireland, as Mr Johnson and the hardline extremists, especially from Northern Ireland, want. So it would actually change nothing. And Mr Johnson can come back, Prime Minister, in a month, 6 weeks' time, and then what? Everybody in the country knows this. He's been boxed into a corner by some very, very bad advice.
Well, what about the Labour Party position? You know, Tony Blair said yesterday, former Prime Minister, Labour Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, said at this stage it would be an elephant trap for the Labour Party, suggesting that they would probably lose. Do you think he's right?
I'm not sure about losing, but I completely agree with Tony that it would be wiser for the Labour Party to keep the alliance going with all the other opposition parties and with many, many Conservative MPs and say now is not the time for a general election. Now is the time for a national debate about what we mean and want by Brexit. And I think at the end of the day, as in Denmark or Ireland or Switzerland, ask the people again. That's not for tomorrow, but right now I think Blair is right. The general election really does put the cart before the horse, because what we need is a settled, agreed policy on the Brexit, not the threat of a no deal, of all trade stopping, of 50-mile queues between Amiens and Calais, or between Dover and London. The supermarket shelves empty of essential products because nothing can get through the customs controls that would have to be put in place on Mr Johnson's no-deal fantasy.
Well, that's very interesting, one would say to me. Right, I may leave it at this video, or may continue, or don't know yet. Or I may do another video tomorrow, guys, on the matter of the Parliament thing. But anyway, thank you for joining me, and I will see you in the next one. Peace.